Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of big Finnish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 13th of July, 2018, we are starting the penultimate Jon Pertwee story, and, well, we are starting a story that actually returns us to a planet that we visited earlier in the Jon Pertwee era. The planet Peladon with the monster of Peladon, and also the final story to be written by Mr. Brian Hales for the program. A lot of interesting finals for this one. Also the final story of the classic series visually to feature the Ice Warriors. The Ice Warriors will, of course, make a couple of returns much later down the line with audios, but this is their last visual appearance. However, the Ice Warriors actually don't show up. They use it as a twist, and, well, we will talk about the twist of the Ice Warriors appearing and how well it's executed when we get there. But the monster of Peladon, much like the curse of Peladon, starts out with, well, political intrigue. And, again, the political intrigue, this time it's quite specific, but again, much like with the curse of Peladon, it's, at least in this first episode, well done enough that you don't actually have to know anything about the period in British history that it's talking about very much. Like, you don't need to know about the mining strikes of the time. You just need to know that, hey, on Peladon there are mining strikes. And these mining strikes are causing problems for the natives. They refuse to basically, they are refusing to use the equipment. Because of that, of course, no work is getting done, and with no work getting done, you don't have a lot of time to make things fit together. Again, lots of problems for the people of Peladon. They still got to work. Like they still have to get working. Not only working done, but also just working. Things just have to, work out. They've got to keep the story going on. Something that the story does a really good job of at least opening up the possibility to. We have, though this first episode, we don't really get too much into the plot because, again, it is, like many six-parters, it's more, let's introduce the story. And one of my main complaints is that I think it could have been a bit more focused on the Doctor and Sarah Jane, and not on the whole politics of the time. Because, well, you have a reappearance of the cult of Agador, the cult of Agador reappearing, and apparently the last Agador, I don't know if it's dead, but it's just not there, but they're still worshipping Agador, even though the Curse of Peladon kind of proved that Agador wasn't a god. It was essentially a puppy, which is something I think is a little interesting that the story is going with that they're going with this whole the story is going with we're pulling the Agador stuff, and not just, and it's not something I think that's normal for this show to really do. It doesn't. It's weird that on this return visit, the religion has made a comeback. Though what's interesting is you have some interesting stuff for Sarah Jane to do. She essentially gets told that, like, well, she's basically put down because she's a girl, so they're sort of going at this. Also a little bit of women's liberation. I know they do that a little later on, and it's introduced slightly here pretty decently. It has a couple of little hiccups that I didn't entirely like, but, it's pretty well done. Even if... but yeah, like, this is just let's introduce our characters. We reintroduce Alpha Centauri. We reintroduce a character from the planet Vega. We introduce the new Queen Thaleria, if I'm saying that right. I really hope I am. because that's a hard name for me to say. Yay for outer planet names. And we have Eckersley, who is from Earth, so no delegate from Earth. And of course, Alpha Centauri being reintroduced as lovable as Alpha Centauri was, still the penis in a shower curtain that it was. It's still a character, and it's getting the characters into the story. It's not really a. This isn't really a, oh, we're doing this story, and we're doing the story, but we're not really doing the story. Like we're just starting it out, and you know what? It's a very enjoyable start. The acting's excellent. Jon Pertwee is great. The advisor to the Queen is great. I do have to say the cliffhanger is a bit off. Mainly because, well, instead of being your standard cliffhanger, what you get is that you get, the cliffhanger should be, because obviously the Doctor gets taken captive by the miners who have, and then he busts himself out. He's still trying to find peaceful solutions. He follows the Queen's champion, who I guess is either on the side of the miners, to see Trisilicate. There's an explosion because they blow up some of the rebels blow up the mine. It should be that the explosion should really be the cliffhanger. It's weirdly enough it's the ghost of Agador appearing from Curse of Peladon. Like what? It doesn't make much sense. So it gives you the intrigue, but it doesn't. It feels like a lesser cliffhanger after the big explosion, because the explosion could be, is the Doctor dead? Who knows? So I'm going to give the Monster Peladon Part 1 an 8 out of 10. Alright, it is the 14th of July, 2018, and I just finished watching Part 2 of the Monster of Peladon. And Part 2 of the Monster of Peladon is a episode where we get a lot more setup. Again, this is a 6-part story, and I think that Brian Hales, being a writer who wrote for a lot of 6-part stories, or at least, he wrote a couple 6-part stories back in the 1960s. He hasn't quite gotten up with the times on how 6-part stories work in the 1970s. Of course, that being the time that this story went out in 1974. And you know what? You can really tell, because a lot of this episode is just a lot of deliberating over, do we trust the Doctor? Do we not trust the Doctor? As well as setting up the big twists of the story. Obviously, because Sarah Jane, hearing about the explosion, immediately runs to help, but because she doesn't really know her way around the planet, she gets lost in the tunnels. Something very, very easy to get done. Something that I think, is very, very much like, in keeping with her character, getting lost in the tunnels of an alien planet, whilst there's still a lot of deliberation about everything. But the Doctor still wants to try to figure out what's going on with Agador, and they essentially just do through a lot of political talking, which is a little boring. It's actually quite boring. This episode is a bit dull in places, quite a bit in quite a few spots. They end up getting thrown into the pit of Agador again, because we don't really have a full villain. You just have to have a lot of deliberating on both sides of the argument. Of course, Sarah Jane actually brings up a really good point, is that, hey, Federation, it's kind of a shame. Peladon's been in this Federation for 50 years, yet you aren't showing them, the benefits of being in the Federation. You're just expecting them to pay up. You're not, which is kind of an interesting sort of commentary on the story. In the story, it's that, hey, just because they're primitive, maybe you should start showing them the benefits and prove that, hey, you should give us this, your Trisilicate. This is why we need it. It's not because we're trying to take advantage of it, it's just because we just need help. Obviously there's this war going on in Galaxy 5, which we don't actually see any of. It's one of those off-screen wars. that Doctor Who stories are pretty fond of. They happen quite a bit in Doctor Who. No need to worry. It's just a kind of a Who trope by this point, the off-screen war. Um, and, it's something that I think the story does an excellent job at, displaying. You also get a lot of intrigue of, like, who might the villain be? You really don't know. Like, though, by the end of the episode, we do have a bit of a retread of Curse where they're thrown into a pit to die. Sort of like the middle of and the end of part 3 of Curse of Peladon, which is kind of a shame because I was hoping we wouldn't have to retread that. Though if it brings the Agador puppy back into the story, which I think it will, is good. That's amazing. Though that is our cliffhanger, which it isn't a very effective cliffhanger if you've watched Curse, because you know that Agador's not dangerous. He like with just the Venusian lullaby the Doctor sings, he'll be fine. Like that's how they're gonna get out of it. It's not a very well constructed cliffhanger. It feels like they just needed a cliffhanger. So that's the one they went with. But that being said, the Monster Peladon Part 2 is quite enjoyable. The direction's nice. Jon Pertwee is a joy. He is on top form. You'd think that because he's leaving in the next story, he would start to just slag a little bit. No, he is, unlike Patrick Troughton in the Space Pirates, he is on top form, just being the Doctor and being amazing at it. So I'm going to give The Monster of Peladon Part 2 a 6 out of 10. Alright, it is the 14th of July, 2018, and I just finished watching Part 3 of The Monster of Peladon. And Part 3 of The Monster of Peladon has some interesting stuff. Mainly, this is where Sarah Jane basically gets to tell the Queen that she needs to get off her ass and do something about stuff because, well, she's been kind of sidelines for the most of the story. She's been a character. She's had herself convinced that she can't do anything because she's just a girl. And of course, you get it's kind of a famous quote for Doctor Who. There's nothing only about being a girl, which is something that's really, really well performed by Liz Sladen. Also, again, Liz Sladen gets to have, gets to have her quite a few big moments in the sun. She's just an excellent actress overall. But you also have, we have quite a lot of this episode still being devoted to the minor stuff, which of course changes by the end, where we get the big cliffhanger reveal that, boom, it's the Ice Warriors. Yeah, the Ice Warriors are back, and it seems like they're the ones that are actually controlling the Ghost of Agador. And, okay, I'm going to be honest, the resolution to the cliffhanger at the end of Part 2 is, well, it's not very good. It's essentially this, like I said in the previous episode, it's the same cliffhanger solution as when Agador was the cliffhanger in Curse of Peladon, which I guess I could understand if this was like years and years later, but this is only about 3 years after the Curse of Peladon came out. Even 2 years. Curse of Peladon aired in 1972. This is 1974. So we really don't have too much of a gap between them. So you have after that, though, with that you have interesting moments. The story itself seems like we're going to be shifting a bit away from this sort of miners thing and going right into sort of an Ice Warrior story, which will be interesting to see how the story works with that. Just because it's already been interesting with just the miner story, but it seems like Brian Hales is making the right decision and realizes that he can't really keep it up and just keep going with only the Ice Warriors. He needed to have two sort of plots, which, again, let's be honest, it's good enough to give you that feeling of, hey, we need to get back into this. We need to see where we're going. This is going to be interesting. Let's watch and hope everything goes well. Although you don't really know if it's going to go well. It's we don't have too much plot. Just some battles with the miners. The Queen deciding to actually take a stand for once. They all realize that it's the refinery for the Trisilicate where the weird stuff seems to be going on, and that's enough to give you a good story. We have the idea of the story going forward before the Ice Warriors are there, sort of taking our expectations and then just sort of shifting them quite a bit. That is something where you really have to have the story going around it to really understand it, and it does a really good job at that. It is still a bit slow. That is one of my biggest problems, is that this has been a very slow story. It's not as fast paced. It seems to be it seems to be a story that just is like, yeah, we're going on with this, even if we don't really have too much plot. But that being said, I'm going to give The Monster of Peladon Part 3 an 8 out of 10, because it is an excellent episode, even if it is just a little slow. Alright, it is the 15th of July 2018, and I just finished watching Part 4 of The Monster of Peladon, and Part 4 is when the Ice Warriors show up. And, well, much like the Curse of Peladon, I do know, of course, that this is something that the Ice Warriors are actually playing the villains in this story. Brian Hales does the smart thing and has them start out in the guise of the protagonists. Mainly because, well, like with the Curse of Peladon before it, they would be protagonists. Why wouldn't they be? It's quite obvious that, they would be the good guys after the Curse of Peladon. They're part of the Federation. They're not as evil as they were. And you have this episode is quite a lot of debating over, well, how are we going to do this? Is it going to be easy for us to get the medal to Galaxy 5 to stop the war? Because this whole war in Galaxy 5 plot is where a lot of the story is debilitated over. You have the questions of, is this the right thing to do? Are we in the right here? Should we be helping Galaxy 5? What's the answer? We don't quite know. Now, the big Ice War thing is a big reveal, because they immediately come in and say, right, we're putting everything under martial law. They automatically take everything, and our Ice Lord is Azixir, who is an interesting character, because he's basically I just want the mine. I want to get the mining going. I don't care. I don't give a damn about your feelings. I just want to get the mining going. He's very obviously the villain. Like, the Doctor's like, yeah, no, these aren't the good Ice Warriors we saw. This is not a good person. But again, it's not a racial thing. It's this is just a bad member of the Ice Warrior Society, obviously, because he's ruthless and a killer. But what's interesting is that the miners, they actually go in and try to save their own, but, Zixir kills half of them. So, the Doctor eventually realizes, that the Ice Warriors are evil because, they were on Peladon this whole time. Back in Part 2, when Sarah Jane saw the refinery and saw that shape, the Doctor realizes you must have been seeing one of the Ice Warriors. You must have been one of them. They've been planning this. They're trying to take the world, Peladon's resources for themselves. They don't care about if people live or die. They just want the resources, and they want to see their plans succeed. And, very admirable. They want to see themselves in a very successful position in the universe, which makes sense. That is what they do. But that's the problem, is that that Alpha Centauri sent for the Ice Warriors, but they came earlier. So are there actually good Ice Warriors coming? We don't quite know. But what's interesting is that the Doctor then decides, well, we should probably we will get the miners to work, but we'll turn up the temperature to try to have the Ice Warriors. We'll try to have the Ice Warriors, be basically heated out. And of course the Doctor thinks, yeah, that'll work. Well, but of course Elixir is smarter. He already realizes that it's happened, and well, they bring the sonic lance, and they have a self-destruct sequence started, and the lance explodes, and that's our cliffhanger. That's great. That is a very interesting sort of conclusion. We don't have this is the villains have the upper hand now. This is how you do Part 4 drama. This is great. This is it's something that you get the idea for. You have the story being, built up around around the Ice Warriors, but you don't have the Ice Warriors you have the Ice Warriors in the upper hand, but sadly, like a lot of this episode, again, it does just take a while to get going, and there are most definitely scenes that aren't necessary. They are very much slowly done, which is okay. I quite enjoy them. It's a general good. It's generally a good thing, but it's generally a good episode. So I'm going to give The Monster of Peladon Part 4 another 8 out of 10. 16th of July, 2018, and as with always, I finished watching Part 5 of The Monster of Peladon, and, well, Brian Hales did it. He fell right into the trap that every Doctor Who writer seems to fall into when given a 6-part story, and that's make Part 5 boring. Well, I wouldn't say boring, but at least a little less good as the rest of the story. Like, seriously, it could have been so much better. It's not bad. It's a very, very, very solid episode of Doctor Who. Very fun episode to watch. Again, that's what I've been saying a lot for this story, though. It's much more fun than I remember. I remember not liking this, mainly because, well, you have Sarah Jane in peril, but also sort of playing for herself, that's just not quite nice, actually. It's good to have the companion fending for herself, even if she is captured by the villains. And the Ice Warriors are, of course, still being as monstrous as ever, which is quite enjoyable to watch. I always have a good time when the Ice Warriors get to be villainous. And that's actually quite a lot of fun of this episode is seeing the Ice Warriors be villainous for a change and not the last time we saw them, they were essentially, I don't want to say they were essentially the good guys. But yeah, it's quite fun. Quite a fun episode. Alpha Centauri gets quite a lot of fun moments. I haven't talked about Alpha this much this time because it hasn't had too much to do. It was just there for the beginning and to represent the Federation. But also, there's that clarification that these Ice Warriors are working outside of Mars. And what's kind of a shame is that you have the Doctor. We have quite a lot of doctors trying to fix everything, but of course it doesn't work quite quickly enough. He isn't quick enough to fix everything perfectly, which is always a shame. And of course the big cliffhanger is that the Doctor the Doctor is very much a one of those. He's working against the clock, and the big cliffhanger is that the Ice Warrior breaks in after him, and that's a good cliffhanger, a fair cliffhanger, a good way to end an episode with suspense and drama. Even if the episode isn't over, it's just that the middle bit is really quite dull. Still fun in places. Not the weakest episode, although it probably shares with Part 2 as the weakest episode so far of this serial. Not quite getting to be the best thing ever, but also not quite being the worst thing ever. Again, that's really all I have to say about Part 5. I'm going to give the Monster Peladon Part 5 a 6 out of 10. Alright, it's still the 16th of July, 2018, and I just finished watching Part 6 of The Monster of Peladon, and Part 6 of The Monster of Peladon I find is an interesting beast, partially because these episodes are of course 25 minutes, and about the 12-minute mark, about halfway through, the Ice Warriors are defeated. And it's great the way the Ice Warriors are defeated. The Doctor, they're not defeated by the Doctor, they're defeated by the people on Peladon, because the Doctor is actually put out of action for a large chunk of this episode. Rather interestingly, in my opinion, because, well, this is the third Doctor's penultimate episode, and Jon Pertwee had a bit of a record for being like, yes, well, why am I only in half this script? You better rectify that, director / producer / person in charge of writing. So it's really interesting is that the Doctor is put under this strain. Sarah Jane doesn't want to leave him, but he forces her to, because she's can't take it nearly as much as the Doctor can, just by nature of only being human. Human Girl from Earth versus Time Lord is a bit different, biologically speaking, and together, Sarah Jane really has to be the one to try to, well, get everything back on track on Peladon, while still sort of, being the character to help the Doctor through. And it's played excellently by Elizabeth Sladen. The character does a wonderful job, with the role. And the Ice Warriors being defeated halfway through is interesting because that also gives us time for Eckersley, who was the villain. He was outed as a villain in Part 5, or maybe was it Part 4? I don't quite remember. But he's also a villain. But he becomes a desperate man, and making the villain desperate is always fun because they then they act all irrationally, and you see like, oh, how crazy they are! They are going for this bad decision. This time he simply goes and puts a gun to the Queen's head, and basically is like, right, I'm going to kill the Queen. I don't care. You can't stop me. Don't try to stop me. It's not going to work. And I think that is really where the story, succeeds. Just having it. Though I will say that that the entire story has a problem with, well, here's the problem. It uses Agador as a get out of the plot free card. I think it would have been better if maybe just the Doctor snuck up behind Eckersley and killed him. I understand that they were. It feel the whole he's running through the caves. It felt padded. Eckersley was fun enough to sustain most of the second half of the episode, but not without the cost of really having not much plot. He's a fun character enough. Also, I like the final scene with the Doctor and Sarah Jane and the Queen. Again, the Doctor, they want to make him royalty, and he's like, yeah, no, I'm gonna leave. Just, you have the minor. He could be your advisor, your chancellor. Just give him a title. Yeah, Sarah Jane even echoes on. It's like, well, there's nothing only about being a minor, just like there's nothing only about being a girl. So that's kind of nice little callback, I guess. I don't really know how to describe it, but whatever it is, it's nice. It's a nice little, hey, look at what we've done. This is great. And it's not poorly done. It's a very well executed. The episode is executed very well, and we leave the story on a very, very good note. So I'm going to give the Monster Peladon Part 6 a 7 out of 10. That being said, we take these scores for the 6 episodes of the Monster Peladon and divide them to give the Monster Peladon a final score of 7.16 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please, as always, leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time when the door closes on another Doctor with Planet of the Spiders.